Just a short video on how to repair a fairly common problem with Ryobi 2-stage electric battery-powered snowblowers. This one is a 24-inch RY 40807VNM. This will also work with the 22-inch variants. A common problem is people hear the motor spinning, but none of the snow handling equipment is moving. What happens is there's a pair of shear bolts. There's actually two pairs of shear bolts on the snow impeller, but it's the rear ones that go. These two shear bolts connect the motor drive shaft from the motor gearbox inside the main snowblower housing to this impeller, and those shear bolts will break. So if your snowblower isn't working, go and look for the bolts. You should see 4 bolt heads right here. These are actually the corresponding nuts, but same thing with the bolt heads on the other side of the shaft. And if you don't see those heads, it means that the shear bolts have gone. Now, at this point, what you need to do is, with no batteries in it, spin the impeller slowly. And if you hear the drive motor spinning, then what has happened is the shafts of the shear bolts are stuck inside their corresponding holes in the motor shaft, and they're actually wedged against the inside of the impeller bore. At which point, what you need to do is take out the 3 screws that hold in the shaft bearing on the left side of the snowblower. There's 3 corresponding bolts on the right side of the snowblower. Take out the whole auger assembly, and you'll also need to take out the 2 front shear bolts on the impeller that connect the impeller to the auger gearbox drive shaft, because this impeller will be wedged onto the motor shaft. At which point, what you do is you break out 8-inch gear puller, hook the gear puller onto the back plate of the impeller, and with this threaded shaft of the gear puller inserted into the bore of the impeller, just pull the impeller off of the shaft. Note, depending on the type of gear puller you have, if it has this kind of twiddly live center thing, this will not fit in the impeller bore. However, this should unscrew. Just pull on it, twist until you feel the threads engage, unscrew it, and then there's going to be a second point on the end of the threaded shaft of the gear puller. And then, of course, you'll hear a loud thunk noise from the impeller shaft bore, as well as the remains of the shear bolts. Once you get the impeller shaft out far enough that the shear bolts remains pop free from the back, and then once you have this off, just clean out the remains of the old shear bolts, get the impeller back on, realign the holes, put in new shear bolts, and you're good to go. If, however, you can freely spin the impeller and you don't hear the motor spinning, it's going to be a lot easier. You don't have to take off the auger. It's just make sure that the internal side holes in the shaft are clear of any shear bolt remains. Put in new shear bolts, good to go without having to take out and then reassemble all of this stuff. So yeah, fairly simple fix. If, of course, you have a problem with this where the motor doesn't spin at all, then you may have much bigger issues and the motor drive may be bad. But that's a lot more complicated fix. This, however, seems to be a fairly common issue with these, and it's very simple to fix if you know how to fix it. Also, the reason for this light down here, this is just to keep the thing from freezing up with ice because it's bloody cold! So, this is strictly necessary if you have somewhere warm to keep it, and of course also incandescent lamp. Evil, evil, and don't try and run this over because they're not making these anymore. At least for now.